What is going on, guys and gals? Brooklyn bound the raid scientist here, and today we're going to have a little chat. We're going to break down the latest raid in Destiny 2, Root of Nightmares, and how it holds up against other raids from Destiny's past. So we're clear, this is my opinion, and my opinion is copyrighted by Brooklyn bound the raid scientist Productions with private use of my audience. Any other opinions, descriptions, accounts of the raid without the consent of me is prohibited. Yeah, anyway, you get the idea. Please feel free to have a differing opinion. I'd love to hear what you think of Root of Nightmares as well. Let's dig into it. First, I had to think about, why do I even run raids in Destiny? Like, what about them makes me play them more than others? What makes them enjoyable? Well, I'm sure this varies from person to person, but for me, it comes down to a few things. First, I'm going to lump one category as call it mechanics, encounter designs, and replayability. This speaks towards overall, are the encounters fun to play, are the raid mechanics enjoyable, and is there a balance between challenging but not brutally unforgiving? Second, loot. As a primary driver of incentive for the entire game, the raid loot table, exotics, cosmetics, and emblems are a major reason I play the raids. Third is the environment, story, and experience. Does this raid make me feel like I'm crawling through a dungeon in search of some great adversary? And how does the environment tie it all together? And finally, for me personally, I enjoy the title grind and challenges for each raid. Doing all the rotating challenges, static challenges, and this journey overall for the title is a big part of why I enjoy the raids. If the triumphs that we have to do for the seal are memorable, fun, and challenging, but not so bad I want to bang my head against the wall, like in the Shuro Chi challenge in Last Wish, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, I salute you. So these, I would say, are the big reasons a portion of the people play raids. And I want to spend a little time on each of these as we rank where Root of Nightmares falls in these categories. So, starting off with mechanics, encounter designs, and replayability. Root of Nightmares introduces the Field of Light and Flux of Darkness buffs that are used to chain nodes, while the rest of the raid members deal with other mechanics and adds. The only encounter that feels different from this is the third encounter, or the planets encounter, that has completely different mechanics in regards to shifting planets, seeing the true identity of those planets, and shooting a boss. Overall, the light and darkness buffs chaining the nodes is pretty stale to me. It's basically just connect the dots and you can easily memorize the dots' locations, use a sword and mobility exotics to overcome this mechanic with very little ease after one or two runs. I think maybe they could have built on this mechanic a little bit more, maybe requiring two players to work together to chain nodes or something like that. Make it a little bit more challenging. I get it though. I think at the onset, Bungie wanted to likely build a raid that was a little bit more approachable for more casual players. Vow of the Disciple was very mechanic focused, had a ton of symbols to memorize, and was very unforgiving. Likely Bungie wanted to dial it back a little bit to allow more people to get enjoyment out of the raid. The highlights of the raid for me are definitely the planets encounter and the Nezarec boss fight. But the long platforming sections between all the encounters and the repetitiveness of the first two encounters definitely cause it to get lower scores. I feel like since all four encounters of this raid were relatively short, they artificially tried to increase the time to do the raid by adding excessive platforming between all the encounters. While the art design and environment really are on display here, especially for the first few times it can be a little interesting, after those initial runs, this just becomes a chore. And I've been in so many groups where people just leave so they don't have to do it at all. And what is with the little rooms after the second encounter and third encounter? Those are literally a task that nobody ever wants to do, so why even put those there? Last Wish is an example of a raid that has some transitions you have to make from encounter to encounter, but they're relatively short, which allows you to spend more time on actual boss fights than just jumping across routes and ledges. Now, as I mentioned a minute ago, while the raid mechanics are simple and the fights are relatively short, this allows for most players to get into the raid and get through it in about an hour with little frustration and a few wipes, getting you more loot faster, which is always a good thing. We'll touch on loot in a minute, but Root of Nightmares does get some bonus points for not making my weekly raids for Pinnacles a 2 to 3 hour ordeal with wipe after wipe. If you know the encounters well, you can play pretty relaxed, shoot the shit with your fire team, and typically not have to sweat your ass off trying to finish the encounters. On Master difficulty, Bungie is still missing the mark drastically on this raid, as they have with previous Master raids as well. There is absolutely no reason to run Master raids outside of doing the weekly challenge on whatever encounter to get the Adept weapon. Adept weapons drop from nothing but the challenge, and the armor is exactly the same with no artifice slots or different cosmetics like we see in Master dungeons. There are no shaders, emblems, or any reason at all to run a full raid on Master difficulty whatsoever, and this is a major fail in replayability. So overall, in the category of mechanics and counter designs replayability, I think I give it about a 6 out of 10. It's a quick raid you can relax and have fun in, but the long jumping sections, basic and counter designs, and failure that continues to be Master raids cause it to lose some points. Alright, so next up let's talk loot, because this is a major reason people run these raids weekly, and is the major pull of any endgame activity. We already touched on Master difficulty, so we can start there. There is no loot on Master difficulty aside from getting one adept raid weapon from doing the weekly challenge encounter on Master mode. So as far as Master difficulty goes, there is zero loot draw to run this raid. Now let's touch on the raid weapons a little bit overall. First, the exotic shotgun conditional finality. This weapon is incredibly good and incredibly fun to use. It is wonderful in solo lost sectors, nightfalls, dungeons, and even raids. It can stun multiple champions and melts absolutely everything. This is, in my opinion, one of the best raid exotic weapons we've gotten since Anarchy or Divinity in Shadowkeep, and I think it has much more viability in more content than Touch of Malice, Collective Obligation, Vex Mythic Class, and Eyes of Tomorrow do. The rest of the raid weapons, in my opinion, are really better in PvP than they are in PvE, which is a little disappointing as they are raid weapons. However, the PvP-focused players do deserve a little love from PvE content. I will admit I have not played much with the Heavy Grenade Launcher, Corax's Distress, but the weapons Rufus's Fury, Michael's Reverence, and even Briar's Contempt have very good PvP perk pools. The Paracausal Affinity perk gives a 20% damage bonus if matching the right element, and rolls on a lot of these weapons. Rufus Fury is also an auto rifle that can get target lock or paracausal as well as reconstruction or moving target. The sidearm is a rapid fire frame and gets perks like Rewind Rounds, Paracausal Affinity, Hatchling, Perpetual Motion, and Frenzy. I would say the only legendary weapon in the loot pool that can give a solid PvE argument is the Trace Rifle Acacia's Dejection, which is a solar trace rifle that can roll with Reconstruction and Incandescent or Target Lock. Note that in a recent patch, sidearms, auto rifles, and hand cannons did get a 20% damage buff, so Michael's Reverence and Rufus's now have a little bit more viability in PvE and endgame content. But even with those buffs, it's still kind of hard for me to choose them over primaries like SMGs or ranged weapons for things like Grandmasters like Pulses and Scouts. But they are a lot better now. As far as armor goes, there's really nothing special about it, aside from the fact that it does allow you to equip the raid-only mods. It would be nice if the stats rolls were a little higher, but I get it, since we already have so many other options for high stat rolled armor. I'm not really sure what the design team was thinking with things like the Hunter Cloak that looks like butterfly wings, the Titan Helmet, or even the Warlock Robes with the weird arms coming out of them. But they are unique, I give them that. I'm sure there's some people out there that are completely disagreeing with me right now, but that's okay. Overall, I'm not a huge fan of the armor design. I thought the Vow of the Disciple armor was much better aesthetically. The raid mods are actually pretty good and useful for this raid. The two best mods are Release Recover and Cabal Extinguisher. Release Recover gives you Cure plus Restoration anytime you lose the Field of Light or Flux of Darkness buffs, which is amazing for anyone doing the running and node shooting. And Cabal Extinguisher is great if you're not running, because you get a 6% damage buff per mod equipped anytime anyone that isn't you gets the Field of Light or Flux of Darkness buffs. Overall, the positives in the loot pool are definitely the exotic shotgun, the raid mods, and the weapons being very good for PvP, with a few good PvE options like the trace rifle and the auto rifle. The negatives are definitely the meaningless loot on Master difficulty, fewer PvE weapons than I would like, and the armor still doesn't do anything like have Artifice armor or anything reason to grind for it. Overall, I think I give loot about a 7 out of 10. Moving on, let's chat the lore and story behind the raid. Now, I'm not a self-claimed lore expert, but Bungie does a pretty good job of building this raid around Nezerek's story and resurrection. Essentially, Nezarec was destroyed by Savathun when she stole the veil, and theoretically hid it on Neomuna. All of Nezarec was destroyed except for his head, which is encased in the tomb on the pyramid ship. During the Lightfall attack, the Traveler hits this pyramid ship with a beam of light, which essentially jolts the ship with light and begins transforming it into this tree of light. At the same time, with the pieces of Nezarec collected, the light was enough to resurrect Nezarec as we push through the encounters. This resurrection of a sort is essentially the source of the nightmares haunting the Neomuna people. Now, one thing the raid does well is build on this story as you're progressing through the encounters. It makes you feel like you're heading towards this final confrontation. In the first encounter, we see Nezarec entombed still, although he speaks to us through the dialogue, and as we finish the second encounter and enter the route, we notice his heartbeat has returned and is pulsing with darkness energy during the jumping puzzle. Finally, at the end, we see the pyramid ship has almost completely transformed into the Tree of Light, and Nezarec breaks his tomb and meets us for a battle. The story is deep, and more importantly, it ties directly in line with the dark versus light story we're reaching towards a conclusion. I feel like Bungie and the writers did a wonderful job tying the raid to the rest of the lore, and it makes me feel like I'm making a major impact on Neomuna and the Witness's plans. Because of this, I give the story an 8 out of 10. Finally, the Dream Warrior title grind and the seal. For me personally, doing all these challenges is a big part of my enjoyment out of the newest raid. Figuring out the challenges, digging in on master difficulty to complete the challenges, and running the raid on different subclasses is a big part of it for me. The raid challenges that rotate do a pretty good job of challenging your raid team, especially on master, without being outright awful. Looking at you, Master Vogue Gatekeepers. I probably struggled the most with the second encounter challenge where you had to shoot the other side's launcher for them, but I'm not sure why, honestly. I think we just were screwing around too much. The final Nezarec challenge was actually kind of fun. I think I'm the only one that didn't really like the planets challenge, but I think that was mainly because the challenge mechanic required you to lengthen the fight, which I always find kind of annoying. I feel like they should make the challenge not make the encounter take longer. The static challenges were kind of lame, honestly, especially the first and second encounters. They were almost a joke, but there isn't a whole lot they could do really for the triumphs there anyway. Overall, the Dream Warrior grind wasn't too bad, and it's probably one of the easier raid titles to achieve, since there didn't seem to be any challenges that were super unbearable. King's Fall had Master War Priest, Vow had Master Caretaker and Master Exhibition, and Vogue had Master Confluxes and Gatekeepers that all made me want to pull my hair out at times. Overall, I give the enjoyment of the title grind probably a 7 out of 10. So where does Root stack up? What do you think? Where would you put it in your list all time? I'd say Root for me falls right about the middle of the pack. I still have Last Wish, Destiny 1's King's Fall, and Wrath of the Machine near the top. But Root of Nightmares is much better to me personally than raids like Garden of Salvation, Eater of Worlds, and Crown of Sorrow. It's quick, relatively simple, and easy to get loot. The encounters can be fun and forgiving without requiring you to sit on the edge of your seat the whole time. The raid exotic shotgun is insanely good, and finally we have some triumphs that can increase the drop chances. The lore is engaging and makes me feel like part of the story. However, the repetitive and arduous jumping areas, mid-tier legendary weapons, and stale connect the dots mechanics keeps me from giving it the super high score. Overall, I'm thinking about a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Let me know down in the comment section what you think. Am I off base? Did I hit the mark? I'm sure we'll have a ton of differing opinions on this one. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, Guardians, stay safe out there.